Hello, everybody. This is Brett Davis coming to you from Brett Davis Unleashed in beautiful Coronado, not Colorado, Coronado, California, at IQ Podcast at Attorney King Studios. My guest today is Tom Terwilliger. Williger.
Listen, no one gets it right.
I think you changed your name and did that on purpose so you could get the upper hand on every conversation.
Absolutely, man. You know, when someone has to say your name 3 times, they tend to remember it. That's
Beetlejuice.
the strategy.
Beetlejuice.
Exactly. That's where I got it.
There you go. There you go. So tell us, where are you originally from?
I'm originally from New York. I was born and raised. I was born in Rockville Center, right next to Brooklyn. We were living in Brooklyn at the time. I come from a relatively big family. There were 5, well, actually 4, before my twin brother and I were born.
Oh, you have a twin.
Yeah, he's identical. Yep.
How do I know this is really you?
Well, let's put it this way. He has done everything he can to keep the identity his own.
Okay, so he's completely differently. The
beard. Oh, yeah. He's got the beard, long ponytail, covered with tattoo.
Okay.
Plus, that's what he is. He's an airbrush artist and a tattoo artist, and he's one of the best, one of the most world renowned. So yeah,
that's
he's pretty
phenomenal.
Cool.
Has he done any work on you?
He never did anything. In fact, he's painted a couple of my motorcycles, but he's never done any tattoos on me. And I'm at that point now where I'm like, you know what? I wouldn't mind getting some ink. It'd be kind of cool now, you know?
A little something from the brother, right? I mean,
absolutely.
And of course, you probably have what kind of motorcycles? Harley?
I've got a little Harley one here. It's very little. I got this, and a lot of guys from the bodybuilding world recognize it. No one knows what the hell it is. I could tell them I was a Green Beret for all they know. It's a Harley Davidson skull with, like a banner and, that kind of thing.
So you have a Harley bike?
I do. I've pretty much rode all my life. Certainly part of my story, which I'm getting tired of hearing my own story, but it was certainly part of it. And a big part of it was early on. I got my first Harley when I was in high school, and it was an old 1958 Panhead.
Wow.
And I rebuilt it and turned it into a pretty cool chopper. And I can tell you, and I think you could probably guess, that having a Harley Davidson in high school could lead nowhere good. And that's exactly where it led.
There's probably some advantages you probably never had. I mean, I don't think even with the bike, you'd have a problem getting dates. So, right?
I had some fun. The problem with the bike was there was no one to ride with. I had very few friends that had motorcycles. A couple had like mini bikes, but that was about it,
Right.
So I wound up, pretty much cruising around New York City looking for bars. Here I am, 17 years old. I'm riding my Harley Davidson in New York City, looking for bars with bikes, Harleys parked out front. And they were few and far between at the time, but the ones that were around back then, it was the 70s, were pretty seedy for the most part. And I wound up connecting with and ultimately riding for about the next 5 years or so with some real characters, man. I will tell you that. It wasn't good.
Well, it's all about life experience, right?
It really is. I certainly got enough of it that 5-year period for sure.
There's some things you can't learn in a classroom.
No, and there's certainly some things I wouldn't teach in a classroom either. Although I do use that story and some of the more graphic details from it when I work with my mastermind groups or when I'm in front of the stage, because a lot of times people, they don't know where you're from. They don't know how you've earned the right to be there or to share or what your experience is, that it's not just book learning. And certainly, as you know, the best experience comes from having actually had the experience. The best education is experience in itself. And I learned some things there. And so I share those stories. It's interesting, Brett, because I used to shy away from that because, when I first started getting into the world of bodybuilding and even beyond that was personal development, personal growth. And I used to kind of hide that background a little bit. I didn't want anyone to know I came from this outlaw biker background thing or had trouble in school or dropped out of high school. I didn't want anybody to know that stuff. As far as I was concerned, they thought I had a master's degree or a PhD. I never said that. But anything they want to think, certainly my vocabulary would give it away that none of those things would be true. However, the background I didn't necessarily want to share until later on. Later on, I began to realize that sharing that background, sharing that authenticity and the road, the trip, the journey to getting to where an individual has gotten to and from is every bit as important as what they do now, what they teach now. It's how they got there. And so I share that. I share some of those stories now openly and with no regret.
Well, I think that's why what's appealing about you is it makes you real. You seem very real when anything that you post on multimedia. It's very like from the hip. It's real. It's not like it's staged. I think people like that.
No, I appreciate that. I hope so. That's what makes me resonate with anyone, and including yourself, Brad, because your stuff out there is great as well, man.
Well,
And I
I don't
think
know
that's
about
one
that.
of the reasons we've connected is because of that authenticity that you put out there, man.
I think some of the things I post piss people off.
Well, there's a certain side of the spectrum, the political spectrum, that definitely don't like some of the things that you post. I try and maintain some neutrality in that respect.
Uh,
Uh, I definitely I lean to some of the things that you write and post and share. We have very mutual feelings in that respect.
well, some of the things that I post, and I don't know about you, but I post them. Some people really believe that I believe some of this stuff. Some of it I do. Most of it's for conversation because I find that's how we learn is through conversation and it's stimulating. It would be boring just to post everything that I believe because there's some things I don't agree with, but I'm like, what are your thoughts about this? And everybody's like, I can't believe you believe that. I'm like, I'm not saying I believe it. I'm just saying, what are your thoughts? You posted it though. Yeah, but this
Yeah.
is about discussion. It's not about, and there are some things I'm very, very firm on, just like you are. I mean, I think it's just the way we're built.
Hmm.
We got to stick with our convictions. That's what makes us who we are. But I'm a very open-minded person, and I try to be as neutral as possible. One thing that I think that we both have in common is we like to help people, and we like to find ways to always self-improve and be the best that we can, and also teach people to be better themselves.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah,
both
I think
extremely
that's absolutely
fascinated,
true.
right?
And I think that's one of the things that resonates between the two of us and so many others in that world of self improvement. And that's really what it is. It's having an open and flexible growth mindset, understanding that and it's really interesting, Brett, because the more I learn, my wife and I have immersed ourselves. We're doing a great deal of studies and even doing some certifications with uh, in the area of increasing our knowledge in mindset and how the brain works, psychology, and even in the area of physiology, utilizing nutrition and peptides and hormones and things. So we really want to. It's just particularly honest to God. For me, the motivation in many respects is the aging process. We're doing everything we can to slow it down. We're not going to resist it. It's not. It's one of those things that's going to happen. We're going to age. We're going to progress. This is simply going to happen. But how can we change our mindsets around that, and how can we facilitate feeling as well as we did, as strong as we did early on? So, the reason I bring that up is because the immersion into studies itself is a growth process. It stimulates the brain. It reacts on the plastic brain and creates new neurons and new pathways and all these other things. But it also, for me at least, is very humbling because I begin to realize that that just when you start to think you know some stuff. I mean, I used to feel very comfortable, quite honestly, putting myself out there as some expert in this particular area, that particular area, right? Now I'm like, holy crap, the amount of stuff I don't know humbles me. I'm like, I can't possibly tell anybody I'm an expert in anything with the amount of knowledge that has not been learned yet and how much more others know. And I guess the best we can do is share what we do know, share what our experiences are, and help people decide where to go and what the next level is from them. We don't have to be at the top, but man, it's humbling when you start to learn new things and realize how little you actually know, man.
It's very humbling, and then also we're in a time where it seems like learning is at a fast pace, probably even faster than we've ever known it. It's
Oh
with
yeah.
with with social media and everything. Just in a way, I feel kind of sad for the newer generation because one positive thing that I can say that's come out of this COVID-19 is we have learned to slow down a little bit and reflect like we
Yeah.
used to do. We had a little bit more time. I think you and I are probably about the same age, 35, right?
Absolutely. So I'm 36. I'm probably a year older.
So what are you about? How old are you?
I just turned 61.
You're 61 years old?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you look amazing.
Ah, man, thank you, thank you. And you know what? The last time someone asked me, and actually, but the answer is from now on when someone says, "How old are you?" I'm going to say my age is none of my business.
Well, Jack Elaine, who was my first boss, used to tell me, he used to say, Brett, he says, you know, business for me to excel in business, I got to take care of myself. And I said, why is that? He says, imagine if I let myself go, it'd be bad for business. I wouldn't be in business. How could I preach all this stuff?
True,
But I mean,
absolutely, and I do feel that way. I feel like I have to practice what I preach. Number one, even
well, you
not even,
motivate me. I mean, I
yeah.
looking at you now, I'm just like, wow. I'm impressed.
Thank you,
I mean, I
man.
was
I
always
really appreciate
impressed,
it.
but wow. So we come from that time though, where things were a little slower paced, and we had to be creative. I mean, we had usually one phone in the house. You know, we sent letters, snail mail, which now they're talking about eliminating the postal service.
Wow.
You know, I mean, isn't that wild? I mean, we're seeing all these changes coming at a faster pace and a more less financially less finance involved to do a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I mean, what we're seeing radical changes. I mean, look at even the education when we talk about going back to learning new things for Dawn and I, my wife and I, learning and studying about peptides and growth hormones and all sorts of. I mean, just really taking our level of knowledge about the body and the mind, how it all interacts together, to another level is so much easier today, and it's on such an accelerated path. I
Hmm.
mean, because we have online courses, we have online trainings. Yes, I still love going to live events and learning, in person. But the online training and courses, it's just unbelievable. I mean, look at Masterclass, for example. Could you imagine back when we were growing up, when we first wanted to become a speaker or bodybuilder or whatever it might be, learning from people like Steve Martin, learning from Martin Short, learning from some of the greatest comedians and authors and writers. I mean, just having absolute direct access to that. I mean, it's unbelievable. But at the same time, you're right. It has another effect on the body. Uh, one of the things I teach in one of my training courses is how to slow down. And this is not new, certainly. I mean, it's mind body techniques to help the body slow down. I say it's taking that revving engine from 10,000 RPMs down to neutral. And what's happening is with everything that's accelerating, even including learning, including staying connected with people, we're always at a slightly higher RPM than you and I were when we were growing up, when we were in our 30s, even for me in my 40s, certainly. You know, our engines are revving at a slightly higher pace. Our minds are working at a slightly higher pace. There's more information constantly coming at us, and the amount of energy required to separate that information, to decide what's important, what's not, the amount of work our reticular activator has to do to even recognize what's a threat and what's not, keeps us working overtime. This may be part of what's happening even with the COVID virus, is that I believe our immune systems, in many respects, are being challenged because of the idea that we don't recognize it. It's so many things coming at one time, and ultimately, and you understand this, is that ultimately the human brain, its first job in many respects, the number one thing it does, is to decipher what's a threat and what's not a threat. Because if I step off that curve and I fall into a hole, is that a threat or is that not a threat? So it's like even the smallest little decisions that we make is determined by whether that's a threat or how great a threat is that or how
Hmm.
not great a threat is that. So you can imagine with all this information coming at us constantly and now being inundated with information that is clearly a threat, our energy systems are being utilized at a higher level, almost like a revving engine, burning through fuel, heating up the oil, and ultimately it takes its toll on us. And it may be leaving us vulnerable to these different things that would otherwise our immune system could easily take care of and eliminate. So, and maybe it's natural selection. I don't know. I mean, do need to eliminate some population. It's not for me to say. That's God's choice.
Sure. The thing is, I mean, we know the numbers. I took a lot of hits this week about. I showed some numbers of things that have happened in a year as far as deaths. I don't know if you saw that or not.
I did. I
Took
did.
some heat from some people, and it wasn't meant to make the COVID-19 situation seem like it wasn't important because to me
Right.
it is a very important thing. but I wanted to put things into perspective, show, more people are dying from certain things that we're not aware of, like car crashes
Hmm.
and, you know, being shot, or even the regular flu. Uh, yeah, this thing stays around longer, but for some reason, maybe because of the unknown, like the brain
Yeah.
has an unknown, like you said, to what's going on. Maybe the fact that this is so new that we're just freaked out about it. And the media, and I'm in media, by the way, and I talked to a lot of people from all the different stations from all over the country, and we've all kind of scratched our heads. And some of us believe that this should be the number one media thing to talk about. But I see a hysteria,
Yeah.
and I see people being stressed out. Yeah, I do believe we should be aware of what's going on, and we should be cleaner. But from what I'm hearing, and again, I'm not a doctor, but it seems like a lot of the people that have passed away had compromised immune systems, different things going on with their health.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. And again, part of that, and again, even those, with those compromised immune systems, there may be a subset of that below that that just wouldn't have necessarily had a disease or an ailment of any kind, but just have weak immune system from being overtaxed on a regular basis by any number of different things. So yeah, there could be so many different explanations for that. I'm kind of with you. I think some of the numbers are not necessarily are skewed, but they may not be accurate in terms of what's really happening. And if we look at even what's happened in terms of overall in our society and the economic impact of all this, as we know, it's pretty radical for the most part, and it may ultimately be much more damaging, certainly to the U.S. than the virus itself. I mean, if we look back several years to when there was a different administration and the N1H1 virus was out there was 61 million people infected by that. And
Right,
yet we heard very little about it. There was no restrictions on shopping, on going to malls, or going to bars, or anything else of that nature. So
right.
there's we're living in a different environment today. That is, it just, and again, part of the fear, the doubt, the uncertainty you talked about, creates anxiety around this stuff. But it's not even just uncertainty. What we do is we're filling in the blanks with what we're not sure about, what we're not clear about, because even the information, the numbers that you put out there, the numbers that others put out there, we don't know exactly what's accurate and what's not at this point.
Mhm.
So it's so that that fear, that doubt, that uncertainty is being filled in by the broader media, who tends to propagate fear, doubt, and uncertainty. Let's put it this way: if there was and we know this, not even if, I can't think of a particular, hurricane or just huge storm that may have come in through the Gulf, right? So it's the biggest storm. The media has it. It's the biggest storm. The entire East Coast, it's going to be wiped out. Everything's going to be wiped out, right? And it turns out to be like this little storm. We got a little bit of rain, maybe a few inches, just like, yeah, it wasn't bad. But it's the media's job in many respects to attract your eyeballs, to attract your attention. And they do that. And I'll include myself in that. We do that by creating something that will get your attention. And the bigger we blow it up, the more concern people have, the more they're going to tune in, the more they're going to listen, the more influence we're going to have. So we fill in these blanks of doubt and uncertainty with what we're hearing from the media, which is a lot of fear propagation. And
Well, I don't
so
think,
again, it infects the body even further,
sure. I don't think you and I are that. I think we respect it. I mean, I'm not speaking for you, of course, but I think the thing is we like to teach and educate people about things. We don't have to survive on what we're doing by adding a lot of, I don't know what the word would be.
Hype.
I was going to say that. Hype, yeah. And so, I mean, anyway, to me, it's not a political thing. It's just, it is what it is. And
Yeah.
I try to look at the best in everything. And if something's right, it's right. If it's wrong, I mean, I'm very black and white. I'm just a very simple person that way. But let's talk more about you. You mind talking a little bit longer?
Oh, absolutely. I'd
I know
love to share
you're in demand. I mean,
whatever would help your listeners or entertain listeners in any way, shape, or
sure.
form. Absolutely, man.
So tell us. Okay, so you're from New York. You got into bodybuilding. How did the whole bodybuilding thing happen?
It's interesting because and when I was a kid, my older brother was always pretty muscular. He worked out. He was into kung fu. He was a police officer in Manhattan, and I looked up to him greatly. And he had this great. He got all the looks and the height. I'm 5'9". He's about 6'1". He got all the looks in the family. All the great looking guy, great physique, and I always admired that, And he worked out. And so when I was a kid, I wanted to do the things that he was doing. One of the things he was doing was studying. He got to the level of instructor at a Kung Fu Wushu Academy in Manhattan, and started teaching my twin brother and I Kung Fu. Uh, that led to, watching at that time, I think the first Bruce Lee movie, The Big Boss, I think it was called, was released in Chinatown in Manhattan. It was still in Chinese and, had the subtitles. So my brother took me to see that, and I was like, oh my God, the impact that Bruce Lee had on people.
Sure, I say Bruce Lee right away. He's one of my favorites.
Well, it's incredibly impactful, even today, as a philosopher, even today, above and beyond the martial arts.
Everything, everything. He's still ahead of the time.
Yeah, I think there was something released on Google the other day, an article I hadn't read. I think I downloaded it, but about Bruce Lee being this unrecognized philosopher, going above and beyond what he did for the martial arts community. But I saw that movie, and I left there, man, because I was already studying Kung Fu. It was already something I was in. But he was muscular. Even though he was skinny,
right?
He was muscular. You know what I mean? The last thing, the abs, the whole deal. You know what I mean? It was just like, man, I wanted
good, very nice back. Nice lats.
Great back. This is what I wanted. I was like, this was the first influence, you might say. So my older brother, in his great deal of wisdom, started to see a waning, not a waning interest in the Kung Fu, but an increasing interest in doing something that would really build some muscle. So he got us into some weight training. He was the first one to really show us how to do some of this stuff with some of his home gym equipment, his weights and stuff, And then one thing led to another. And my next influence was Arnold Schwarzenegger. I saw a magazine cover. It's now Muscle and Fitness magazine, but at the time it was called Muscle Builder. I don't know if you'd remember that.
Sure, I do.
And it was a cover of him, him on the cover, and he was doing some curls, and he had this arm bar, and he was like, and the splitting his teeth, and I was just like, what? I was every bit as impacted by that as I was with the Bruce Lee, and so that one thing led to another. We started working out much more seriously with a group of guys that I was playing lacrosse with and doing some sports with, and they all kind of fell off, and I loved it. It was like magical. As soon as I held that bar, it was like magic. It was like something resonated with me that made me feel good. I was struggling at that time in school because I had dyslexia. I was hyperactive. I was, all frustrated. I was fighting constantly. All these things. I was kind of, acting out.
Same?
What's that?
Everything you just said exactly is what I was.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, this is, and what's really fascinating, Brett, and maybe you've come to realize this yourself as well, is at the time we feel isolated. We feel like we're the only ones going through this. This is a unique experience because in many respects we feel isolated in that respect. But later on, I mean, look at how many people now you listen to, you talk to, or you hear their stories that had something similar. The dyslexia.
I've heard more of them, but recently I've been hearing more of them. More stories.
It's real because people are sharing it more. They understand that this is something. And so if we look at it even further, certainly beyond my story, is that if we look at, the impact that had on so many young lives, so many young people, many of them learned to rise above it. I consider myself very fortunate that I was able to do that, but some didn't, rise above that and wound up maintaining that same level of self-esteem and self-doubt that was instilled in many respects, not as victims, but certainly something that was blueprinted into us early on. In fourth grade, you're struggling to read and you can't write and you're hyperactive and you're acting out and you're fighting constantly. For me, I was put in they didn't know what to do. They put me in the special ed class.
That's what happened.
Once you're in the special,
they really didn't know. They
didn't know.
Right. I mean, a friend of mine who's a scientist knew. He's a little younger than me, but we never talked about it until maybe a couple years ago. He says we talked about special ed classes. He says, "Well, you had dyslexia." I said, "We never talked about it." I said, "How did you know that?" He said, "Well, I always knew that." I said, "Well, we never talked about it." He said, "I didn't think it was anything we needed to talk about." I says, "I didn't even know that because I didn't know what it was."
Yeah. Wow. So how did he know you had it? How did he know you had it?
He's a pretty smart guy. I mean, he taught people on. I mean, he's a genius. I mean, that guy's
Yeah.
story is amazing in itself. But you know what really let me know that I had it, and I never thought about it, was my wife. She started noticing one day when I was writing things or certain things. She says, "You're writing those things backwards," and I didn't realize it. And I looked, and I liked, and I compared to what was, I compared it to something else.
Yeah.
Then I realized, and so at that point, and then she told me first, and then my friend came back and told me he knew, but
It's
I don't think
fascinating, isn't it? It's
they
really
didn't.
fascinating.
No,
For
they didn't know. They
years,
didn't know what to do with us, did they?
yeah, they don't know. They don't know what to do. It's a struggle, and the average teacher doesn't know. They've got a certain style. They've got a method that they teach, and that's it. And for the first, I don't know how many years, 10 years of my life, my name was mocked, MOT. I mean, that's how I spelled my name. I mean, it's like they
Wow.
finally figured it out.
Wow.
Well, something's going on here. So they don't know what to do. So we put in a special ed class, and as you know, or as you can imagine, and this may not be your personal experience, but put in a special ed class, it is a stigma at
Oh
that age.
yeah. Oh yeah.
It is, you are, I mean, I
Sure.
can
You're
remember,
stupid. You're dumb.
yeah, you're dumb. You're stupid. And you start to brand yourself, you become branded. And
Right.
even the people, I can remember one very distinct, a lot of, I work with a lot of people in terms of identifying and resolving trauma, early trauma, because we know that early trauma creates these blueprints. And those blueprints start to manifest in our belief systems. Our beliefs start to manifest in our actions and ultimately our results. So I work with a lot of people in helping identify these early traumas and these blueprints. So for me, I remember distinctly, after the fourth grade, one of my best friends, her name was Diane Gianelli, and we used to listen to records on our porch all the time. We were young, I was young, this fourth, fifth grade now. And I remember the first time after being put in the special ed class, walking up to her house, and she had this outside porch. And she came running out and said, "Go away. I don't want to play with you anymore. You're a retard. You're dumb. You're a retard." And the impact that had, that was
Oh,
one of
it's
my early
terrible.
traumas because it's a betrayal, it's a humiliation,
Wow.
it's all those things that we code then that become part of who we are. And so that began to manifest more and more and more. And I rebelled even more.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean,
You
it
probably
just,
went more inside too. And you probably were very, very protective of who you allowed yourself. Probably you didn't want to be around. What grade was that?
absolutely. I was in fifth grade. The beginning of fifth grade was when I was put in the special ed class.
I was put in mine third grade.
Oh, so you would, so you had a very similar experience. Hey,
Just tell,
you know
tell
how I know when people have dyslexia or have had dyslexia
they become
is
politicians.
if they're freaking smart, if they're working with people, if they're sharing with people, if they're telling a story. It's like, huh, you have dyslexia, don't you?
I was going to say, he sounds like some of the politicians.
One of my favorite speakers, Les Brown. You
Oh
know,
yeah, I love Les Brown.
Les Brown, had this very similar experience. He was the dumb twin. He was a twin as well,
I didn't
and
know
he was
that.
the dumb twin. And so, yeah, as soon as I see somebody that's it's like, this guy's pretty brilliant. I bet he had some learning challenges early on in his life,
Isn't
and
that
learned to
interesting?
overcome them.
Tom Cruise also has dyslexia.
Is that right?
Sure.
Wow. Yep. A lot of people. So that belief system began to infiltrate my consciousness and my unconsciousness, and in everything I did, I started fighting more, started rebelling more. One thing led to another. Even in fifth grade, my brother and I, we started a gang called the Savage Skulls, right? And we didn't know that the Savage Skulls was an actual gang in the South Bronx. And if they knew these fifth graders were wearing colors on their back that said Savage Skull, we probably would have got our asses
That's
kicked.
hilarious.
But then again, they might have been like, yeah, a bunch of fifth graders. Who cares? But we were the bully killers. We became the bully killers because a lot of the kids in the special ed class truly did have challenges and problems, and either psychological, emotional, or mental problems that were challenges, and many of them physical even. And so when the to this day I still call them when the regular kids, the regular class kids would bully or pick on some of those kids. Nah, we weren't having it, man. There was no way. So our little gang, myself and my twin brother or so, would find our way to take these guys out. We didn't, certainly not like the mafia might take them out, but you can imagine what a fourth or fifth grader might do to take you out. And we became very tough, and we were studying kung fu at that time as well, so it wasn't that difficult put somebody in their place who was being a bully. And but that ultimately, as you can imagine, Brett, that lasted well into high school. Like I said, I got my first Harley Davidson, but I think the original question you had talked about was getting into bodybuilding. I think, did you mention
I
bodybuilding?
did.
Or my
You know what?
imagining.
I think we're going to have to do another interview with you, and I've been wanting to work with you for a while on some things, and hopefully when this thing blows over,